यशोदनन्दना व्रजजनरञ्जना यमुनातीरावनचारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत शिशिमाद His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada की जय ISKCON BBT संस्थापक आचार्य His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada की जय Srimad Bhagavatam की जय All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories, all glories, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naran Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So this morning we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 4, in the matter of the process of creation, text 21. yad-aṅghri-abhidhyāna-samādhi-dhautayā dhiyānupaśyanti hi tattvam ātmanaḥ vadanti caitat kavayo yathā-rucaṁ same mukundo bhagavān prasīdatām yad-aṅghri-abhidhyāna-samādhi-dhautayā dhiyānupaśyanti tattvam ātmanaḥ vadanti caitat kavayo yathā-rucaṁ same mukundo bhagavān prasīdatām yad-aṅghri-abhidhyāna-samādhi-dhautayā dhiyānupaśyanti tattvam ātmanaḥ vadanti caitat kavayo yathā-rucaṁ same mukundo bhagavān prasīdatām yad-aṅghri-abhidhyāna-samādhi-dhautayā dhiyānupaśyanti tattvam ātmanaḥ vadanti caitat kavayo yathā-rucaṁ same mukundo bhagavān prasīdatām. yad-aṅghry-abhidhyāna-samādhi-dhautayā dhiyānupaśyanti tattvam ātmanaḥ yathā-rucam mukundo bhagavān prasīdatām yad-aṅghry-abhidhyāna-samādhi-dhautayā dhiyānupaśyanti tattvam ātmanaḥ vadanti caitat kavayo yathā-rucam same mukundo bhagavān prasīdatām. Vaishnavis. yad-aṅghry-abhidhyāna-samādhi-dhautayā dhiyānupaśyanti tattvam ātmanaḥ kavayo yathā-rucam yat-aṅghri, whose lotus feet, abhidhyāna, thinking of at every second, samadhi, trance, dhautayā, being washed off, dhiyā, by such clean intelligence, anupaśyanti, does see by following authorities. He, certainly, tattvam, the absolute truth, ātmanaḥ, of the Supreme Lord and of oneself, vadanti, they say, cha, also, etat, this, kavayaḥ, philosophers or learned scholars, yathā-rucam, as he thinks, saha, he, may, mine, mukundaḥ, Lord Kṛṣṇa who gives liberation, bhagavān, the personality of Godhead, prasīdatām, be pleased with me. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. It is the personality of Godhead, Sri Kṛṣṇa, who gives liberation. By thinking of His lotus feet at every second, following in the footsteps of authorities, the devotee in trance can see the absolute truth. The learned mental speculators, however, think of him according to their whims. May the Lord be pleased with me. Purport. The mystic yogis, after a strenuous effort to control the senses, may be situated in a trance of yoga just to have a vision of the super soul within everyone. But the pure devotee, simply by remembering the Lord's lotus feet at every second, at once becomes established in real trance, because by such realization in his mind and intelligence are completely cleansed of the diseases of material enjoyment. The pure devotee thinks himself fallen into the ocean of birth and death and incessantly prays to the Lord to lift him up. He only aspires to become a speck of transcendental dust at the lotus feet of the Lord. The pure devotee, by the grace of the Lord, absolutely loses all attraction for material enjoyment, and to keep free from contamination, he always thinks of the lotus feet of the Lord. King Kulashekara, a great devotee of the Lord, prayed, Kṛṣṇa tvadiya pada pankaja panjarantam adyaiva me vishatu manasa rajahamsaha prana prayana samaye kapavata pitte kantavarodana vidau smaranam kutaste. My dear Lord Kṛṣṇa, I pray that the swan of my mind may immediately sink down to the stems of the lotus feet of your Lordship and be locked in their network. Otherwise, at the time of my final breath, when my throat is choked up with cough, how will it be possible to think of you? There is an intimate relationship between the swan and the lotus stem. So the comparison is very appropriate. Without becoming a swan or paramahamsa, one cannot enter into the network of the lotus feet of the Lord. As stated in the Brahma Samhita, the mental speculators, even by dint of learned scholarship, cannot even dream of the absolute truth by speculating over it for eternity. The Lord reserves the right of not being exposed to such mental speculators, and because they cannot enter into the network stem of the lotus feet of the Lord, all mental speculators differ in conclusions, and at the end they make a useless compromise by saying, as many conclusions, as many ways, according to one's own inclination, yathā-rucaṁ. But the Lord is not like a shopkeeper trying to please all sorts of customers in the mental speculator exchange. The Lord is what He is, the absolute personality of Godhead, and He demands absolute surrender unto Him only. The pure devotee, however, by following the ways of previous acharyas or authorities, can see the Supreme Lord through the transparent medium of a bona fide spiritual master, anupaśyanti. The pure devotee never tries to see the Lord by mental speculation, but by following in the footsteps of the acharyas, mahajanayena gatassa pantaha. Therefore, there is no difference of conclusions amongst the Vaishnava acharyas regarding the Lord and the devotees. Lord Caitanya asserts that the living entity Jiva is eternally the servitor of the Lord, and that he is simultaneously one with and different from the Lord. This tattva of Lord Caitanya's is shared by all four sampradayas of the Vaishnava school, all accepting eternal servitude to the Lord even after salvation. And there is no authorized Vaishnava acharya who may think of the Lord and himself as one. This humbleness of the pure devotee, who is 100% engaged in his service, puts the devotee of the Lord in a trance by which to realize everything. Because to the sincere devotee of the Lord himself reveals himself, as stated in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, text 10. The Lord, being the Lord of intelligence in everyone, even in the non-devotee, favors his devotee with proper intelligence, so that automatically the pure devotee is enlightened with the factual truth about the Lord and his different energies. The Lord is revealed not by one's speculative power or by one's verbal jugglery over the absolute truth. Rather, he reveals himself to a devotee when he is fully satisfied by the devotee's service attitude. Shukadeva Goswami is not a mental speculator or compromiser of the theory of as many ways, as many conclusions. Rather, he prays to the Lord only, invoking his transcendental pleasure. That is the way of knowing the Lord. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to Canto 2, Chapter 4, in the matter of the process of creation, text 21. Om Ajnanatirmirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Caitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Kṛṣṇa Caitanya Devam Shri Radha Kṛṣṇa Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Anvitamscha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Kṛṣṇa Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Jayapataka Swaminiti Namine Namacharya Padaya Nitai Kripa Pradayane Gaurakata Damdaya Nagragramatarine Nama Om Vishnupadaya Kṛṣṇa Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Gopi Paranadana Dasa Iti Namine Nama Om Vishnupadaya Kṛṣṇa Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasyatya Deshatarine Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubi Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Sri Kṛṣṇa Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Kṛṣṇa 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim yatkripatamaham bande Shri Guruntarinam yatkripatamaham bande Paramanandamadamam Shri Caitanya Ishwaram Katanchana Smrite Yasmin Dushkaram Sukaram Bhavet Vismrite Viparitam Syat Shri Caitanyam Namamitam. So here Shukadeva Goswami is praying that the Lord be pleased with him, and Srila Prabhupada ends the purport by saying he prays to the Lord only, invoking his transcendental pleasure. That is the way of knowing the Lord. So this is the characteristic of the pure devotees, that they are exclusively dependent on the mercy of the Lord. This is one of the 6 characteristics of surrender. We sing, we recite every day, Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasyatya Deshatarine. So Saraswate, so we, the members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, are Saraswatas, which means that we follow the practice of Krishna consciousness as given to us by Srila Prabhupada, who took it from his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So here in this verse, Srila Prabhupada quotes King Kulashekar, beautiful prayer about how King Kulashekar is desirous that his mind may be entangled, the swan of his mind may be entangled in the stem of the network of the stem, the lotus feet of the Lord. And Prabhupada writes, there is an intimate relationship between the swan and the lotus stem. So the comparison is very appropriate. Without becoming a swan or paramahamsa, one cannot enter into the network of the lotus feet of the Lord. So I invoked Namaste Saraswate Deve just to bring up the point that up till the time of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Gaudiya Vaishnavism generally followed the system of the Babajis. We never had the four ashramas, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha and Sannyas. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was the one who introduced that in our Gaudiya line. So here when it says that without becoming a swan or Paramahamsa, one cannot enter into the network of the lotus feet of the Lord, does that imply that everyone has to become a sannyasi? Is that the implication? No. Srila Prabhupada in his Vyasa Puja lecture in London on the 22nd of August 1973, he says the following, very important instructions. I am sometimes criticized by my god brothers that I have become a marriage maker because a sannyasi does not take part in a marriage ceremony, but I get my disciples married. This is also unique in the history. So they criticize me that I have become a marriage maker, but they do not know why I take this risk. I have got many disciples, they are married couples, but all of them, husband and wife, they are helping this movement. Here is Bhagavān Das. He is also married man. Children. So actually married couples should be Paramahamsas. Paramahamsa means the topmost stage of sannyasi. Paramahamsa, a sannyasi has got four stages: Kutichaka, Bahudaka, Parivrajaka and Paramahamsa. So then Prabhupada goes on to distinguish between the four classes of sannyasis. The Kutichaka is the one who stays on the outskirts of the village and his necessities are supplied by people. And then he speaks about Bahudak. He goes from home to home and begs. Then he speaks about Parivrajaka. He goes from place to place, village to village, preaching the message of Kṛṣṇa. Then he says, as our Srimad Revati Nandan Maharaj is doing, he has now very nice bus. Then he says, all others are also doing. Grihasthas are also doing. Because our only business is Kṛṣṇa. It doesn't matter whether a Grihastha, Vanaprastha, Sannyasi, it doesn't matter. So when he preaches all over the world, that is called Parivrajaka. And when he is experienced, he executes the work by his assistants. This is called Paramahamsas. So Grihasthas are supposed to be Paramahamsa. Just like Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He was a Grihastha, magistrate, government servant. But he has worked so much for Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu in writing books. Not only books, but also begetting a child like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, my spiritual master. So that is the Grihastha. They should produce children like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. Because we want big stalwart men to preach this Kṛṣṇa consciousness movement. So Prabhupada goes on to speak about duty in Kṛṣṇa consciousness, and this duty is taught by Kṛṣṇa and the spiritual master. So Prabhupada makes this point very clear, that the standard of being Paramahamsa is a uniform expectation, not just from the sannyasis, but even from the Grihasthas, which means that Paramahamsa, let's take the word Hamsa. We find in the first canto of the Bhagavatam
Narada Muni's instructions to Vyasadeva. So there, in the purports, Prabhupada makes it very clear that devotees are like swans. They like to swim in very clear, beautiful lakes. Then he speaks about the crows. Of course, it's from the verse itself, but he elaborates on it. And he speaks about how people in this world are interested in mundane topics. And then he distinguishes the devotees from the people in this mundane world. So there are many topics of interest in this material world, the many subject matters of research in this material world. And Prabhupada says that all of these subject matters are like the rejected refuse. And then he says this is fit for the crows. So this is applicable to all members of ISKCON, that all of us are meant to distinguish the activities of Krishna consciousness from garbage. Now, generally in this material world, the word garbage is attributed to impious activities. I mean, if you take the other religious traditions, generally the word garbage is connected with sinful activities, undesirable activities, which is true. That, however, Bhagavatam gives us a higher perspective, which is that whether the activities are impious or whether the activities are pious, still they are all garbage, because they are all directed towards sense gratification. However, we should be careful when we quote the Sarva Dharman Paritejya verse. So generally we take it that a devotee is above all dharma, right? So that's the general understanding. But before we come to the platform of Sarva Dharman Paritejya, there is something else, which is what the other traditions of the world speak about. Generally, if you look at the other traditions of religious traditions in the world, they all speak about Sarva Adharman Paritejya. Nobody speaks about Sarva Dharman Paritejya. So therefore, we say, as Krishna himself says in the Bhagavad Gita, that this is Raja Vidya, which means the king of all knowledge, because it speaks not only about, it generally doesn't, it speaks not only about Sarva Adharman Paritejya, but it also speaks about Sarva Dharman Paritejya. So, however, that does not become a license for devotees to commit sinful activities. Because sinful activities, because we say Sarva Dharman Paritejya, devotee is not concerned with dharma or adharma. So therefore it does not become a license, or it's not permissible for devotees to commit sinful activities. Therefore, in the very beginning of the Nectar of Instruction, in the very first verse, Prabhupada begins with that. Saying that Kunjara Shauchava, which in elephant bath, he says devotees should not practice elephant bath, which means that, oh, I am practicing pure devotional service, therefore it does not matter even if I occasionally commit some sinful activities. Anyway, I can overcome it by practicing pure devotional service. In fact, Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Instruction, Prabhupada, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, all of them have clearly explained that this is not meant, even the first verse is not meant only for the sannyasis. In fact, Prabhupada makes it very clear that the Goswami title is not inherited by some family tradition. The Goswami title is inherited by spiritual control of the senses. And he says that all the verses of the Nectar of Instruction are applicable not just to the sannyasis, but even to the grihasthas. So the goal of all members of the Kṛṣṇa consciousness movement is to control the senses. In fact, at least tolerate the urges of the senses. By tolerating the urges of the senses, one eventually comes to the platform of conquering the urges, just like the Goswamis, Nidrahara Viharakadi Vijitau. They didn't have to tolerate the urges, they just conquered the urges. Like Shukadeva Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj here. They continuously heard, Shukadeva Goswami continuously recited the Bhagavatam, and Parikshit Maharaj continuously heard the Bhagavatam for 7 days. They were oblivious to the urges of hunger and thirst or sleep, not that they were tolerating it. So the first verse of the Nectar of Instruction only speaks about toleration. That's possible even for the grihasthas. That's a very definition of being an initiated devotee, which means that one has to at least tolerate the urges of the senses. So this Paramahamsa means that a devotee tolerates the urges of the senses at the very least, and a devotee has no interest in anything apart from pure devotional service, which means that a devotee is not interested in philanthropic activities, nationalistic activities. There may be some philanthropic activities which may be considered good in this world, or some nationalism which may be favorable towards Kṛṣṇa consciousness. Irrespective of all that, a devotee is not concerned with any of that. A devotee does not distract himself or herself from being fixed in the path of pure devotional service. That is the meaning of Hamsa, which means that the swans, they clearly, the very word swan means that which can separate milk from water. So devotees can separate whatever is not connected with devotional service to everything else. For example, in India, it is not uncommon to find hundreds and thousands of Kṛṣṇa bhaktas. Hundreds and thousands in different families, pious families, it's just possible. But do we identify with them? No, we don't identify with them. We identify only with the pure devotional creed. The creed of Srila Prabhupada and the previous acharyas, the Mahajanas. We don't even identify with the pious Hindus of Indian society. This is what is the meaning of a Paramahamsa. Prabhupada explains it even more specifically. Sometimes devotees think if we say Prabhupada is the one who introduced Kirtan in the West, somehow that is not true. Some devotees think like this, because there were other yogis who went to the West, there were other people who introduced Kirtan in the West. So why do we say that Prabhupada is the one who introduced Kirtan in the West? So it's like saying that you may have so much counterfeit currency. Just because it looks like a currency, and just because others have been circulating it and doing it, that does not mean it can be compared to a real currency. So when we say Prabhupada was the one who introduced Kirtan in the West, Prabhupada was the one who did so many different things in the West. He was the actual yogi and things like that, which is a fact. Others were not bona fide practitioners. They did not introduce the genuine thing, and we should maintain our identity at that. We should not try to merge into the class of the yogis and the philanthropists and the nationalists, and we should keep our identity separate and distinct. We are the family of the pure devotees. This is our inheritance. This is our legacy. We come in a line of the pure devotees of the Lord. Prabhupada actually writes in a letter. Sometimes devotees get carried away by activism, but Prabhupada didn't want devotees to be involved in any form of activism except propagation of pure Krishna consciousness. So here is something which Prabhupada, a very illuminating letter which Prabhupada wrote to Rai Rama Prabhu. This is regarding animal slaughter. Of course, he speaks a lot, he brings out a lot of very important points in this. Regarding propaganda against animal slaughter and back to Godhead, please do not print any picture showing how a cow is being murdered in our BTG. This will pollute the whole atmosphere. We are not meant for moving anyone's sentiment against animal slaughter. We are neither Buddhists or Jains whose main propaganda is against animal slaughter. Even the so-called vegetarians who do not take Krishna prasadam are as much sinful as the non-vegetarians. Our propaganda is different. To make people Krishna conscious, which automatically makes them sympathetic against any kind of animal slaughter. According to Srimad Bhagavatam, one living entity subsists on the life of other living entities, either vegetarian or non-vegetarian. But we are neither of them. We are not vegetarian nor non-vegetarian. We are transcendental. We are concerned with Krishna prasadam. Try to popularize Krishna prasadam as you have already done. People will naturally become vegetarian without any ghastly propaganda. The pictures of a Mahajana or similar pictures for propagating the Bhagavata conclusion should be our objective. I'll repeat that again. The pictures of a Mahajana or similar pictures for propagating the Bhagavata conclusion should be our objective. Other pictures, there are so many subject matters. Just like we follow 4 principles, say for example illicit sex life. We can publish so many pictures of illicit sex life. That will not advance our cause. Similarly, we may make propaganda against animal slaughter, but that will not advance our real cause. Krishna consciousness is based on pure understanding, not by any sentimental provocation. People must be intelligent enough to catch up this Krishna conscious movement without being carried away by any sentimental wave. Then he says, we should always remember that we do not belong to any group like the Karmis, Jnanis or Yogis. We belong to pure devotional service group following the footprints of great Mahajanas. I'll repeat that again. We should always remember that we do not belong to any group like the Karmis, Jnanis or Yogis. We belong to pure devotional service group following the footprints of great Mahajanas. Our purpose should be that we are on one side and all others, they are on the other side. Of course, Prabhupada goes on to further about that animal slaughter. But the point is that we are on one side and all others are on the other side. So, our attempt should not be to somehow or the other try to integrate or try to normalize with mainstream society. It should be the exact opposite of that. We should try to integrate mainstream society into our culture of pure Krishna consciousness. This is the meaning of being Paramahamsas, which means we don't accept any garbage, but we turn those who have accepted garbage, the crows, into the swan. I don't recollect the exact, as I was speaking I just recollected that there is one devotee who had come from France to London, and I forget the name, it's there in Prabhupada's remembrances, and so he tells Prabhupada that after coming to London and after being with the devotees, he came for some other work. He says that I feel so enlivened, I feel so happy. I don't want to go back to France and mix and carry out whatever I had originally planned to. then Prabhupada says, oh, that's because you have become a swan. And later on, there is his initiation ceremony. And when he comes to pick up his beads from Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada notices him and he says, ah, the swan. So this is our purpose, that we want to make people forget their concept of material life. And we want to bring everyone into our society, the society of the Paramahamsas. And Prabhupada was the only one who actually proved it, that traditionally it's the sannyasis who would travel and preach and establish centers. And the most famous, the most prestigious thing was during Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's time to send preachers to the West, especially England, to establish Krishna consciousness. But Prabhupada would often say very proudly that my godbrothers, sannyasis, they failed, but 3 of my grihastha couples, they established what my sannyasi godbrothers could not do. So this is what Prabhupada expected from the Krishna consciousness movement, that all members of the Krishna consciousness movement be Paramahamsas, and by virtue of that strength, that force of Krishna consciousness, that purity of Krishna consciousness, by that purity we will be able to integrate the mainstream society into our society of the Paramahamsas. And there's a lot to speak on this verse, but we have only about 7 or 8 minutes left, so I think I'll stop here. If there are any comments or questions. Yes, Mataji. You can say it, I'll repeat the question.
First and foremost, thank you for a beautiful class where you're emphasizing the purity of this wonderful movement that Prabhupada is giving. So, thank you for that.
Thank you.
The second thing I want to point out is how proud Srila Prabhupada was of his grihastha disciples. He said, my Guru Maharaj made an army of sannyasis, and I'm making an army of grihasthas to spread this Krishna consciousness all over the world. Husband and wife, man and woman, working together as a team to bring Lord Chaitanya's mercy everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. So she was saying how Srila Prabhupada was proud of his grihastha disciples, how he said that my Guru Maharaj had an army of sannyasis, but I have an army of grihasthas, and man and woman together they are practicing and spreading this Krishna consciousness movement all over the world, and he was very proud of that fact. Thank you. One moment.
Thank you very much for coming to us. My question is, you were speaking about we need to integrate the mainstream culture into our culture to the Krishna service.
Yeah.
So my question is, what are some of the effective ways practically to do this?
Okay, the way Prabhupada did it is the way we should do it also. Prabhupada was not, if you look at Prabhupada, when he went to the West, he never went with a 10-year plan, a 5-year plan. He never made all these different kinds of plans. But he says that secret of how I achieved success. In a lecture he mentions, then when he was sitting in Rupa Goswami's Samadhi in Vrindavan, that's a very famous lecture where he says he only thought, how shall I do it? How shall I do it? How shall I do it? So we can establish Krishna consciousness across the world if we just follow in the footsteps of Srila Prabhupada. It was by his Bhakti Shakti that he was able to establish the Krishna consciousness movement. It was not by his plans, not by any other means. He would always say, I believed 10% in the words of my spiritual master. And Prabhupada always credited his success to that. I just followed what my Guru Maharaj said. In fact, he used even used the expression blindly, in a proper sense. So even if you look at how the Krishna consciousness movement spread during Prabhupada's presence, it's not that the members who spread the Krishna consciousness movement were scholarly, or they made this plan or that plan, but they could see that Prabhupada's dependence on Krishna, Prabhupada's dependence on a spiritual master, and it is that dependence which they imbibed and which they went and spread around the world. So the only formula for integrating the world into Krishna consciousness is Prabhupada's formula, is believe 100% in what he did, believe 100% in what he said, and simply with that faith go on and it will happen. Of course, Prabhupada did say that the Krishna consciousness movement can be carried on forward with intelligence and organization. So intelligence means to understand what is right, what is wrong based on his teachings. That's the meaning of intelligence. Intelligence does not mean in the sense of classical sense of intelligence. Intelligence means to discriminate right and wrong, what is appropriate, what is inappropriate based on his books. And organization, which is he said that we should conduct ourselves in a manner. That's why he said, your love for me will be shown by how much you cooperate together. If you don't cooperate, there is no organization. So it is cooperation which brings that sense of organization, that we should do things together, the sense of the mission. But which again he imbibed from his own Guru Maharaj. He even after he succeeded in establishing the Krishna consciousness movement, still he made efforts to request his god brothers that let's work conjointly. So Prabhupada always believed in this strongly, that we should work together, somehow or the other. We should work together and spread the Krishna consciousness movement. But there is no set formula apart from what Prabhupada himself did, to do Sankirtan, to distribute books, distribute prasadam, deal with the people in this world as if we are like ladies and gentlemen. Have genuine compassion as Prabhupada had. I was recently reading when Prabhupada came to India and in Bombay, when he was dealing with people. Of course, he did the same across the world and everybody testifies to this. There is one B.L. Jaju, who was, Prabhupada was inducing him to become a life member. So he said the one thing that really impressed me about Prabhupada, he had seen so many sadhus, was Prabhupada had no pretensions. Like we saw that word pretension so many times earlier in this chapter. Prabhupada had no pretensions. He just behaved with me like a family member. And that's what Prabhupada did also when he went across the world, that he behaved with everyone without any pretension, without any air of superiority. He was genuinely compassionate. So if we just follow, all the ingredients of success are there in what Prabhupada did. So we just study how he did things, then we'll get a clear understanding of how we can succeed also.
Can you explain in the verses, in the purport it's mentioned that there is an intimate relation between the swan and the lotus stem.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand this part. What is the relation?
Prabhupada explains in another lecture, the swan, it is so attracted by this lotus stem. So because of it keeps going towards the stem and it's a big network. And it says the swan gets entangled in the network by its activities. So he says that's why Kulashekar prays like this, that my let it get entangled, it says. The word entangled is used because swan, by sporting, it likes to go near that lotus stem, and because it's an intricate network, it gets entangled. And once you're entangled, we usually don't pray for entanglement, but this kind of entanglement is wonderful entanglement, to get entangled in the stems of the lotus feet of Krishna.
If the preaching is decreasing, does it mean that we are again affected by garbage?
If the preaching is decreasing, is it that we are affected by garbage? Yes, because if we are, if we preach vigorously, then the success there will be success. It's not that it's an oxymoron that we are preaching vigorously, practicing vigorously, but there's no result. It doesn't work like that. Like Prabhupada says, give the example that if a man is potent, then definitely there will be pregnancy. So he compares compares that virility to the virility of Kṛṣṇa consciousness. In one place he does that. He says that if we practice Kṛṣṇa consciousness very seriously, then that potency would be there. Therefore he emphasized that purity is the force. So wherever there is purity, there would be the expansion of Sankirtan movement. Just like Vaisheshika Prabhu always says, when I was a student I heard this. I was very, very impressed so many years ago, more than 20 years ago. So he once said that sometimes people complain, this problem, that problem, temple president, this problem, all kinds of problems they complain about. But then he said that people forget that there is the holy name. Holy name is also a person. He said, and then he said that if you take shelter of the holy name, by its very nature, the holy name cannot be contained. So if you take shelter of the holy name spontaneously expands. Then he says, then you forget all these things about temple president, this problem, that problem, and you just cannot contain the expansion of the holy name. So yes, so if we take to it sincerely, definitely.
Please throw some light on garbage and how to reconcile garbage and yukta vairagya.
How to reconcile garbage and yukta vairagya? It's a very good question. So the problem is that Maya has two potencies. One is the avaranatmika potency, the other is the prashetatmika potency. So one is the covering potency. And in the material world, this covering in bodies is represented by the skin. Therefore, Prabhupada says it's called the skin disease, because what is inside the skin? It's all horrible substances. But it is the skin which maintains the appearance of sanity. Otherwise, you can't even interact or deal with anyone, right? So, it is the skin which maintains the. If I look at you, if you didn't have skin, it would be very difficult. Or if I didn't have skin, what does it mean? So, it will be very ghastly kind of thing, right? So, which is what the real material world is all about. But there is a covering which makes it appear nice. It's called the prakshepatmika potency of the Lord. So when we say yukta vairagya means, okay, it appears nice so that we live, right? So be careful. Be careful of what is behind it. Do not think that this is fit for enjoyment. Okay, so we have to be conscious of that fact. Then yukta vairagya and garbage go together, in the sense that you understand that the appearance of attractiveness is there, so that either I can get trapped into it, or that attraction is conducive for me to engage in the service of the Lord. That's all. So we have a nice object here, nice table here. Its presence is attractive. Okay, we can use it in service of the Lord. But ultimately, we should realize this is just matter. Prabhupada, in fact, I was hearing one lecture this morning where Prabhupada is saying that there is no thing as two types of living entities. It's not that there are two types of living entities. He says there are living entities and there is only dead matter. Okay, but dead matter is moving. So we think it is a living entity. It's not a living entity, Prabhupada says. There is only living entity and there is dead matter. Dead matter moves. It's doing wonderful things. But it's dead matter. Because the presence of the spirit soul, the dead matter is moving. But it's not another kind of living entity. So you have only living entity which is Sachidananda, then you have dead matter. So then there are different levels of sense control. In the first level of sense control, in the Ramanuja line, it is explained very nicely. The 4 levels of sense control. In the first level of sense control, one is drawn to the object of the senses, but somehow one is restraining one's senses. That's the first level. Second level of sense control is, one is not drawn, but when one sees an object of the senses, one derives some enjoyment from it. Still, one is not drawn, one feels some mental enjoyment. Oh, this object is very nice. The third level of, in fact there are four, I'll just summarize it as three for the sake of simplicity. Third level of sense control is that when you see a sense object, you're neither drawn towards it, nor do you think it is enjoyable. That is the highest level of sense control. So we progress through different levels, and when on the highest level of sense control, you don't see something as worthy of enjoyment. You don't think it is a desirable sense enjoyment, yet we think it is useful for the service of the Lord. Therefore, if you actually look at Yukta Vairagya, it says anasakta vishayam, which means being unattached. Technically, that is the definition of Yukta Vairagya. Being unattached, one engages. That only the pure devotees can do. Only they are unattached. So what are we doing actually? We are not practicing Yukta Vairagya in the technical sense of the term. We are practitioners of Yukta Vairagya. We are not, I don't know how to put it, like we are training in Yukta Vairagya. Right? We are training in Yukta Vairagya. So to come to the stage, first of all we see every object is not separate from Kṛṣṇa. So we are being trained in that concept. Eventually we come to the stage that it's not even an enjoyable object. It has meaning only when it is engaged in relationship with the Supreme Lord. So we come to that stage. So ultimately only the pure devotees are capable of Yukta Vairagya. If we try to imitate them, it becomes Yukta Bhoga. Like sometimes devotees think, if I build a big house, I can host devotees. So how many days are you going to host devotees? Are you doing it for your own sense gratification, or are you actually doing it to please the Vaishnavas? So whereas if a pure devotee conceives of a plan like that, that's Yukta Vairagya, because he's not looking at it from the perspective of his sense enjoyment. He's looking at it only from the perspective of the pure devotee, from the enjoyment of the Lord. So we can come to that stage, but we begin the practice of Yukta Vairagya and eventually come to the stage of perfectly situated in Yukta Vairagya. Yes. Okay, it's 9 o'clock, sorry. We can talk privately. I didn't look at the watch and there is a glare on the watch there.